I returned home after signing my first major contract as a software engineer for $6 million over 3 years. I had finally proven myself after years of being dismissed by my family, who favored my younger sister, Madison. As I rushed upstairs to share the incredible news, Madison appeared at the top of the staircase, her face twisted with rage. "You think you are better than us now?" Madison screamed before shoving me backward. The last thing I remembered was the sickening crack of my skull against the marble steps as darkness swallowed everything whole. The steady beeping of machines pulled me from the void 3 days later. My head felt like someone had split it open with an axe, and every breath sent waves of pain through my ribs. The sterile white ceiling above me came into focus slowly, along with the realization that I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV tubes. "She's awake," a gentle voice said nearby. A nurse with kind brown eyes and graying hair leaned over me, checking my pupils with a small flashlight. "I'm Sarah. You've been in intensive care for 72 hours, honey. You suffered severe head trauma and multiple fractures." My throat felt like sandpaper when I tried to speak. "What happened to me?" Before Sarah could answer, the door burst open and my parents walked in. Harold, my father, wore his usual stern expression, while my mother, Linda, followed behind with her arms crossed. Neither of them smiled or showed any sign of relief that I was conscious. "Well, Fiona, I hope you learned something from this," Harold said coldly, not even bothering to come close to my bed. "Madison told us exactly what happened." My mother nodded curtly. "She said you came home completely intoxicated and started yelling at everyone. When Madison tried to calm you down, you became aggressive and fell down the stairs." The words hit me harder than any physical pain. "That's not true. I was sober. I came home to tell you about my contract and she pushed me." "Don't lie to us," Linda snapped. "Madison was terrified. She said you were stumbling around, slurring your words, and when she tried to help you, you lunged at her." Harold adjusted his tie with the same dismissive gesture he had used throughout my childhood whenever I tried to explain myself. "We've already told the extended family what really happened. Uncle Robert is particularly disappointed in you. Maybe this will teach you some humility." He continued, his voice devoid of any parental warmth. "You've always thought you were smarter than everyone else, but look where that arrogance got you." My mother stepped closer, but only to deliver another blow. "Madison was just defending herself when you got aggressive. She feels terrible about what happened, but she had every right to protect herself from your drunken attack." Sarah, who had been quietly checking my chart, looked uncomfortable. After my parents finished their verbal assault, she approached them diplomatically. "I need to speak with you both outside about Fiona's care plan." Once they left, Sarah returned with a concerned expression. "Honey, I've been a nurse for 28 years, and I've seen plenty of alcohol-related accidents. Your injury pattern doesn't match what they're describing." "What do you mean?" "Falls from intoxication usually result in different types of injuries. What you have looks more like impact trauma from being pushed. The angle of your skull, fracture, the way your ribs are broken, even the bruising patterns." She lowered her voice. "I documented everything in your medical file." Before I could process this information fully, my parents returned with grim faces. Harold cleared his throat like he was delivering a business presentation rather than talking to his injured daughter. "Fiona, we've made a decision about your care," he announced. "Since you brought this situation on yourself through irresponsible behavior, we don't feel obligated to cover the costs of extended treatment. Your insurance will cover the basics," Linda added. "But we're not paying for any luxury rehabilitation or private facilities. You'll be transferred to the county facility as soon as you're stable enough to move." My heart sank as the reality of their abandonment settled in. "You're leaving me here alone." "Actions have consequences," Harold replied matter-of-factly. "Maybe next time you'll think before you drink yourself into a stupor and embarrass this family." They turned to leave without another word, but Harold paused at the door. "Madison sends her regards. She's been worried sick about you despite everything you put her through." The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow sounded like the final nail in a coffin. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each one to keep myself from screaming. Sarah returned a few minutes later and sat down beside my bed. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said quietly. "No parent should treat their child that way, especially not when they're hurt and vulnerable. They've never believed me about anything." I whispered, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Madison has always been their golden child, and I've always been the problem." Sarah handed me a tissue. "Well, for what it's worth, I believe you, and I'm going to make sure you get the best care possible, regardless of what they said." As I lay there in the growing darkness, one thought kept circling through my mind. If my own parents could abandon me so easily, maybe Madison's attack wasn't as spontaneous as it seemed. Maybe she knew exactly what she was doing when she pushed me down those stairs. 2 weeks later, I found myself in the county rehabilitation facility, a depressing building that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. My room was barely large enough for a bed and a small dresser with bars on the windows that made me feel more like a prisoner than a patient. The physical therapist assigned to my case was a man named Jake, probably in his early 30s, with calloused hands and a genuine smile that felt foreign after weeks of cold treatment from my family. Unlike everyone else, he actually listened when I explained what really happened. "Your balance is getting better," he said during one of our sessions as I struggled to walk across the parallel bars. "The brain trauma is healing well considering how severe it was initially." "Jake, can I ask you something?" I paused, gripping the bars for support. "Do you think someone could fake medical documents?" His expression grew serious. "Why would you ask that?" "My family keeps talking about papers I supposedly signed before my accident. Power of attorney documents, lease agreements. But I don't remember signing anything like that." "Fiona, if you suspect fraud, you need to report it. Document forgery is a serious crime." Before I could respond, my Uncle Robert appeared in the doorway. He was my father's brother, a pompous man who owned a small accounting firm and never let anyone forget it. "Fiona," he said, walking into the room with his chest puffed out, "I came to talk some sense into you." Jake excused himself, but I caught him glancing back with concern as he left. Uncle Robert pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "Your parents are beside themselves with worry and embarrassment. The whole family is talking about what you did." "What I did?" My voice cracked with frustration. "I was pushed down a flight of stairs and nearly killed." Now, he said condescendingly. "Madison explained everything. You were drunk and belligerent, and when she tried to help you, you attacked her. She's traumatized by the whole experience." "That's a lie, Uncle Robert. Madison pushed me because she was jealous about my contract." He waved his hand dismissively. "Contract? What contract? You've been unemployed for months, according to your parents." My blood ran cold. "I haven't been unemployed. I work for Technova Solutions. I just signed a $6 million deal with them." "Fiona, you need to stop these delusions and take responsibility for your actions. Madison has been taking care of all your affairs while you've been here, and frankly, she's found some concerning things." "What kind of things?" "Empty bottles hidden in your apartment, unpaid bills, erratic behavior that your neighbors have complained about. She's been trying to clean up the mess you made of your life." The room started spinning, but not from my head injury. "Where is Madison staying?" "In your apartment, of course. Someone needs to maintain the property, and since you obviously can't take care of yourself, she stepped up." He stood to leave. "I suggest you focus on getting better and making amends instead of creating wild conspiracy theories." The next day brought an even worse visitor, my cousin Ashley, who had always been a gossip and troublemaker. She sauntered in wearing designer clothes and carrying a large purse, her bleached blonde hair perfectly styled. "Oh my goodness, Fiona," she said in a fake sweet voice. "You look terrible. I mean, better than expected, but still pretty rough." "Hello, Ashley. I just had to come see you myself after everything Madison told us. She's been so brave through all this, taking care of your mess while dealing with her own trauma from your attack." I didn't attack anyone. Ashley sat down and pulled out her phone. Look, I'm not here to judge, but you really need to get help for your drinking problem. Madison showed me pictures of all the empty bottles she found in your apartment. She held up her phone showing photos of liquor bottles scattered around what looked like my living room. But something was wrong with the pictures. The furniture was arranged differently than I remembered, and there were items I had never owned. Those aren't mine, I said firmly. Fiona denial isn't going to help you recover. Madison also found these concerning bank statements. Ashley produced a folder from her purse. Apparently, you've been spending money recklessly and your accounts are nearly empty. I grabbed the papers with shaking hands. According to the statements, someone had been withdrawing large amounts of cash from my accounts for months, along with numerous purchases I had never made. Designer clothing, expensive electronics, even a new car. This is impossible, I whispered. Madison said you probably don't remember because of the drinking, Ashley continued. She's been trying to figure out how to help you manage your finances better. Where did these statements come from? Madison has been collecting your mail and handling your business affairs. She's power of attorney now, so she's legally responsible for everything. My hands trembled as I stared at the papers. When did I supposedly give her power of attorney? Right before your accident. She said you came home that night and insisted on signing papers because you knew you had a problem and needed help. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were starting to come together. Madison hadn't just pushed me down the stairs in a moment of rage. She had been planning something much more elaborate. Ashley, I need you to do something for me, I said urgently. Can you call Technova Solutions and ask to speak with my supervisor, Karen Williams? Why would I do that? Because I need to prove to you that I have a job and a contract. Please. Ashley sighed dramatically but pulled out her phone. After a few minutes of being transferred, she got through to someone. Hi, this is Ashley Chen calling about my cousin Fiona Miller, she said into the phone. I'm trying to verify her employment status. There was a long pause. Oh, I see. And when was the last time you spoke with her directly? Another pause. Via email only. For how long? Her expression changed. Are you sure? Okay, thank you. She hung up and stared at me with confusion. They said you've been working remotely since your accident and communicating only through email. Your supervisor said you've been participating in video meetings with your camera off, claiming you're still recovering. That's impossible. I've been here the entire time. Fiona, this is really weird. Either you're lying to me or something very strange is going on. As Ashley left, looking troubled for the first time since she arrived, I realized the scope of what Madison had done. She hadn't just stolen my money and my apartment. She had stolen my entire identity and was living my life while I was trapped in this facility. That evening, Jake stopped by during his off hours, which was against protocol, but showed how much he cared about my welfare. I did some research on what you asked about document forgery, he said quietly. If someone is impersonating you electronically and has forged legal documents, that's multiple federal crimes. Jake, I think my sister is living my life while I'm stuck here. She's using my identity, my job, even my apartment. That's identity theft fraud and potentially much worse. Have you considered contacting a lawyer? With what money? According to those bank statements, Ashley showed me my accounts have been drained. Jake pulled out a business card. I know someone who might help. Victoria Stone is a disability rights attorney who takes cases pro bono when there's clear evidence of abuse. She's helped other patients who were taken advantage of by family members. As he handed me the card, I felt the first spark of hope I had experienced since waking up in the hospital. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as my family wanted me to believe. Jake, there's something else. I keep thinking about the timing of everything. Madison pushed me down the stairs right after I told her about my $6 million contract. What if this wasn't just sibling jealousy? What if she planned this? His face grew grim. Fiona, if that's true, then you weren't just a victim of assault. You were the target of attempted murder. The following week brought a parade of family visitors, each one more devastating than the last. They came in shifts, as if they had coordinated their attacks to maximize my emotional destruction. First came my grandmother Patricia, a sharp-tongued woman in her 70s who had always preferred Madison. She swept into the room wearing her best church dress and carrying a worn leather Bible. "Fiona Marie Miller," she said, using my full name like I was still a child being scolded. "I am deeply ashamed of what you have become." "Hello, Grandma Patricia." Don't you hello me in that casual tone. The entire congregation at First Baptist is praying for your soul after what you did to poor Madison. She positioned herself in the chair like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. That sweet girl has been beside herself with guilt, thinking she could have prevented your fall if she had just recognized the signs of your addiction sooner. I don't have an addiction problem. Denial is the first sign of a troubled mind child. Madison showed me the bottles she found in your apartment, and frankly, I'm surprised you functioned as long as you did with that much poison in your system. Grandma Patricia opened her Bible and began reading verses about temperance and self-control, her voice growing louder with each passage, as if volume could force righteousness into my damaged brain. The Lord tests us with trials, Fiona, and this accident is your opportunity to find redemption. Madison has graciously agreed to care for your worldly possessions, while you focus on spiritual healing. What worldly possessions? Your apartment, your car, your financial obligations. She's been such a blessing taking on that burden without complaint. She snapped the Bible shut. I suggest you spend your time here in prayer and reflection, instead of making wild accusations against the sister who saved your life. After she left, I sat in stunned silence until Jake appeared for my afternoon therapy session. "Rough morning?" he asked, noting my red-rimmed eyes. "My grandmother just told me that Madison is a saint for taking over my entire life." "Fiona, I've been thinking about what you said regarding the timing of your accident. Have you considered that someone might be orchestrating these visits to keep you isolated and confused?" Before I could answer, voices in the hallway announced the arrival of my next tormentors. Madison walked in, holding hands with Derek, my ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago. Seeing them together felt like being punched in the stomach all over again. Madison looked radiant in a designer dress that I recognized as one I had bought but never worn. Her auburn hair was styled perfectly, and she was wearing my grandmother's antique pearl necklace that had been promised to me. "Fiona," she exclaimed with fake enthusiasm, "look who wanted to come see you. Derek has been so worried." Derek stepped forward awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, but trying to play his part. "Hey, Fiona, I heard about your accident and wanted to make sure you were okay." "How thoughtful," I said flatly, staring at their intertwined fingers. Madison noticed my gaze and smiled sweetly. "Oh, this probably seems sudden, but Derek and I reconnected after your accident. He's been such a comfort during this difficult time. We've been spending a lot of time together while Madison handles all your affairs," Derek added, as if that explanation made their relationship less cruel. "She's been amazing," Derek continued, "taking care of your apartment, dealing with all the paperwork, even trying to salvage your reputation at work after the email incidents." "What email incidents?" Madison's eyes sparkled with malicious satisfaction. "Oh, Fiona, you don't remember. You sent some very inappropriate messages to your coworkers before your accident, rambling, incoherent things about conspiracies and people being out to get you. I've been doing damage control, explaining to everyone that you were having personal problems." "I never sent emails like that." "The alcohol really affected your judgment near the end," Madison said with mock sympathy. "But don't worry, I've been in touch with your company explaining that you're getting treatment and hope to return to work someday." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should let you rest." "Wait," Madison said, pulling out her phone. "I want to show Fiona something wonderful." She scrolled through her photos and held up the screen showing images of her hosting a dinner party in my apartment. My friends and coworkers were there laughing and enjoying themselves while Madison played hostess. "I've been maintaining your social connections," she said innocently. "Everyone was so worried when you became reclusive and started acting strangely, so I've been assuring them that you're getting help." "You're living my life," I whispered. "I'm preserving your life until you're well enough to take it back," Madison corrected. "Someone has to pay the bills and maintain relationships while you focus on recovery." After they left, I felt completely hollowed out. Madison wasn't just stealing my possessions, she was erasing me entirely and replacing me with herself. Everyone I cared about was being told that I was mentally unstable and that Madison was heroically holding everything together. The psychological warfare continued throughout the week. Various aunts and uncles stopped by to express their disappointment and share their concerns about my erratic behavior leading up to the accident. Each visitor had been fed the same story: I was an unstable alcoholic who had attacked my innocent sister and brought shame upon the family name. But the cruelest blow came on Friday afternoon when Madison returned alone, carrying several shopping bags and looking particularly smug. "I have something exciting to share," she announced, setting the bags down and pulling out a small velvet box. My heart sank as she opened it to reveal an engagement ring. "Derek proposed last night," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger and admiring how it caught the light. "We're planning a Christmas wedding." "Congratulations," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "And here's the wonderful part." Madison continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We've decided to have the reception in your apartment. The living room has such beautiful natural light, and since you're obviously not using it, it seems perfect." She pulled out a folder from one of her bags. "I brought the lease agreement for you to sign. It officially transfers the apartment to me for the remainder of the lease term just to make everything legal and proper." I stared at the document, recognizing my own signature at the bottom, even though I had never seen the papers before in my life. "I didn't sign this." "Of course you did," Madison said with a laugh. "Right before your accident, when you were having one of your episodes, you insisted on putting all your affairs in order because you knew you needed help." The signature is dated after my accident. Madison glanced at the paper and shrugged. "Clerical error. The important thing is that you wanted me to take care of everything, and that's exactly what I'm doing." She began pulling items from her shopping bags, expensive makeup designer shoes, and jewelry that all belonged to me. She arranged them on the small table beside my bed, like trophies. "I thought you might want to see some of your things," she said. "I'm taking good care of everything, as you can see. Those are mine. Technically, everything is under my management now, but don't worry, I'm not selling anything important. Well, except for that expensive computer equipment you had. Derek and I needed the money for the wedding, and you obviously weren't using it." The computer equipment she referred to was my entire home office setup, worth nearly $15,000 and essential for my work in software development. Without it, I couldn't even attempt to regain control of my professional life. "Madison, why are you doing this to me?" For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw the raw hatred in her eyes. "Because you always thought you were better than everyone else. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect everything while I struggled to find my place. Well, now I have everything you had, and it fits me much better." She gathered up her things and headed for the door, pausing for one final blow. "Oh, and Fiona Derrick says to tell you that what we have now is so much deeper than what you two ever had. He never realized how superficial your relationship was until he got to know me." As the door closed behind her, I finally understood the full scope of Madison's plan. This wasn't just theft or fraud. She had systematically destroyed my reputation, isolated me from everyone who cared about me, and was now planning to permanently erase me from my own life. But she had made one critical error. She was so confident in her victory that she was becoming careless. The forged signatures, the impossible timelines, the electronic impersonation of me at work. She was leaving a trail of evidence that could destroy her if I could just find a way to expose it. Jake appeared in my doorway, having witnessed Madison's dramatic exit. "That was your sister. That was the person who tried to kill me and is now stealing my entire existence." He sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. "Fiona, what she's doing goes way beyond family dysfunction. This is criminal conspiracy on a massive scale." "I know, and I think I'm ready to call that attorney you mentioned. Victoria Stone. Yes, because if Madison thinks she can erase me completely, she's about to learn just how wrong she is. Victoria Stone arrived at the rehabilitation facility the following Monday morning, and I immediately understood why Jake had recommended her. She was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my situation within minutes of meeting me. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a tablet and settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. "Start from the beginning and don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." For the next 2 hours, I walked her through the entire nightmare from my contract signing to Madison's engagement announcement. Victoria took notes occasionally, asking pointed questions that revealed her deep understanding of elder abuse law and fraud cases. "The first thing we need to establish is your mental competency," she said when I finished. "If Madison has been claiming you're mentally incapacitated, we need medical documentation proving otherwise. Dr. Martinez has been overseeing my case. He's mentioned several times that my cognitive function has returned to normal." "Good. I'll need all your medical records, including the initial emergency room reports. Jake mentioned there might be security camera footage from the hospital. The security guard Walter said something about cameras, but I haven't seen any footage." Victoria made more notes. "We'll subpoena those records. Next, I need to understand the scope of the financial fraud. You mentioned bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. My cousin Ashley showed me statements that looked legitimate, but the transactions weren't mine. I'll need access to your original bank accounts and credit reports. If Madison has been impersonating you electronically, there should be digital fingerprints we can trace." Over the next week, Victoria worked with surgical precision to unravel Madison's web of deception. She brought in a forensic accountant named Thomas Wright, a quiet man with thick glasses who could trace financial fraud like a bloodhound following a scent. Meanwhile, Sarah had been conducting her own investigation within the hospital. She approached me during one of her shifts with a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been reviewing the security protocols," she said while checking my vital signs. "The cameras in the main lobby have a clear view of the entrance you would have used that night. Can you access the footage?" "Not directly, but I know someone in hospital administration who owes me a favor. Walter, the security guard, has been asking questions too. He said something about your sister's behavior that night struck him as odd." "What kind of odd?" "According to Walter, Madison arrived at the hospital exactly 11 minutes after the ambulance brought you in. That's barely enough time for someone to drive here from your neighborhood, even if they left immediately after calling 911. But if she pushed me down the stairs, she would have had to call for help and then come to the hospital." "Exactly. Unless she delayed calling for help, which would suggest she wanted to see how badly you were hurt before deciding whether to get medical assistance." The implications sent chills down my spine. Madison might have stood over my unconscious body, debating whether to let me die. Jake had been conducting his own research during his off hours, using his access to the rehabilitation facility's computer systems to help me investigate my financial accounts. "Your credit report shows some interesting discrepancies," he said during one of our evening sessions. "There are applications for new credit cards that were supposedly filed from your home computer after your accident. But I've been here the entire time." "Right, and the IP addresses on some of these applications trace back to your apartment building, but the timestamps show they were submitted during hours when you were in surgery or sedated. So Madison was using my computer to steal my identity while I was fighting for my life." It gets worse. "I found communication records between your email account and your employer that show someone has been impersonating you for weeks. The writing style doesn't match samples of your actual emails from before the accident." Victoria's forensic accountant made an even more disturbing discovery. Thomas Wright arrived at the facility on Thursday afternoon with a thick folder of financial records and a grim expression. "Ms. Miller, I've traced unauthorized access to your accounts going back nearly 3 months before your accident," he said, spreading papers across the small table in my room. "Someone has been systematically transferring money into accounts controlled by Madison Miller. 3 months, but the accident happened 6 weeks ago. Exactly. This wasn't a spontaneous decision after your injury. Madison was planning to steal your assets long before she pushed you down those stairs. Victoria leaned forward intently. What kind of amounts are we talking about? Over $400,000 has been moved out of Fiona's accounts. Most of it went to pay off Madison's personal debts, credit cards, student loans, and a car payment. But there are also large cash withdrawals that suggest she was stockpiling money for something specific. Like what? Perhaps escape funds in case her plan went wrong. Or maybe she was planning to disappear after completing her theft. The most chilling discovery came from Victoria's investigation into my employment records. She had contacted Technova Solutions directly and spoken with my supervisor, Karen Williams. According to your employer, someone claiming to be you has been participating in video conference meetings for the past month, Victoria explained. However, they've been using audio only claiming camera problems due to your recovery. Madison has been pretending to be me at my job. It appears so, but here's where she made a critical error. Your company records all their video conferences for security purposes. I've subpoenaed those recordings, and we should be able to prove that the voice isn't yours through audio analysis. How is that possible? Voice recognition technology is very sophisticated now. Every person has unique vocal patterns, speech rhythms, and pronunciation habits that are as distinctive as fingerprints. If Madison has been impersonating you on those calls, the audio analysis will prove it definitively. Sarah provided the final piece of the puzzle during her shift on Friday evening. She slipped into my room after visiting hours with a manila envelope tucked under her sweater. Walter came through, she whispered, glancing around to make sure we were alone. He made copies of the security footage from the night of your accident. She pulled out several printed screenshots that showed the hospital's main entrance and parking area. The timestamps indicated the images were taken within an hour of my arrival by ambulance. Look at this, Sarah said, pointing to one of the photos. This shows Madison arriving at the hospital, but notice the timestamp. According to the footage, Madison had arrived only 8 minutes after the ambulance. But even more incriminating was what the photos revealed about her condition. She was completely calm and composed. Her clothing was neat and clean, and she was carrying a purse and her cell phone as if she'd been planning to go out. Someone who had just witnessed a traumatic accident wouldn't look this put together, Sarah observed. She's not crying, her makeup isn't smudged, her hair is perfectly styled. This looks like someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. There's more. Sarah continued showing me another photo. Walter noticed that Madison's car was already running when she arrived. She left it in the parking lot with the engine on while she came inside, which suggests she didn't plan to stay long. Or she wanted to be ready for a quick escape if needed. Exactly. Walter also mentioned that Madison asked very specific questions about your condition before she even saw you. She wanted to know about brain damage, the likelihood of permanent disability, and whether you were conscious. Victoria reviewed all the evidence over the weekend and called an emergency meeting on Monday morning. She arrived with the additional attorney, a serious-looking man named David Chen, who specialized in criminal prosecution. Fiona, we have enough evidence to file both civil and criminal charges against Madison, Victoria announced. The financial fraud alone carries a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. But there's something else we discovered, David added. We've been analyzing Madison's internet search history, which we accessed through the digital forensics investigation of your home computer. What kind of search history? Victoria exchanged a meaningful look with David before answering. She was researching how to become someone's medical proxy, the legal requirements for declaring someone mentally incompetent, and the process for making end-of-life decisions for incapacitated family members. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You think she was planning to have me declared brain dead? The search history includes specific queries about organ donation procedures, how long someone can remain on life support, and the legal authority of next of kin in medical decisions, David explained. Combined with her delay in calling for medical help and her questions about your brain damage, it suggests a much darker plan. Madison wasn't just trying to steal your money and identity, Victoria said quietly. I believe she intended to let you die and then inherit everything legally as your closest surviving relative. Jake, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke. So when Fiona survived and started recovering, Madison had to improvise with the mental incompetency angle. Exactly. But improvisation led to mistakes, and those mistakes are going to destroy her, Victoria concluded. Fiona, are you ready to take your life back? More than ready. When do we start? We've already filed the preliminary motions. Madison and your parents will be served with papers tomorrow morning, and the first court hearing is scheduled for next Friday. Victoria smiled with satisfaction. I think it's time for your family to learn that you're not as helpless as they assumed. The week leading up to the court hearing transformed me from a victim into a warrior. Victoria Stone had assembled a legal team that worked with military precision gathering evidence and building a case that would demolish Madison's carefully constructed lies. Dr. Martinez provided crucial testimony about my cognitive recovery, stating unequivocally that I was mentally competent and had been so for weeks. His medical records documented every aspect of my healing process, including detailed notes about my family's suspicious behavior and their refusal to participate in my care. The patient's family demonstrated unusual patterns of interaction, he wrote in his official report. Rather than expressing relief at her recovery, they seemed disappointed and continued to insist she was more impaired than clinical evidence supported. The forensic computer analysis revealed the full scope of Madison's digital deception. Thomas Wright discovered that she had been using sophisticated software to mask her IP address while accessing my accounts, but she had made critical errors that left digital fingerprints throughout my financial records. She created a false timeline, Thomas explained during our strategy meeting. The power of attorney documents show Madison supposedly gaining legal control of your assets on the evening of your accident, but the electronic signatures were created using software installed on your home computer 3 days after you were hospitalized. Victoria smiled grimly. She forgot that hospitals monitor patient vital signs continuously. We can prove exactly when you were conscious and when you were sedated. There's no window of time when you could have signed those documents. The audio analysis of the work conference calls provided even more damning evidence. Dr. Rebecca Harrison, a forensic voice specialist, had compared the recordings of the supposed Fiona with samples of my actual voice from before the accident. The vocal patterns are completely different, Dr. Harrison explained. Voice recognition technology can identify unique characteristics like pitch variance, speech, rhythm, and pronunciation habits. These recordings are definitely not the same person. What about the content of what was said during those meetings? I asked. That's almost more incriminating than the voice analysis, Victoria replied. Madison clearly didn't understand your job responsibilities. She agreed to project deadlines that were impossible, made commitments that demonstrated no knowledge of software development, and used terminology incorrectly throughout the conversations. Jake had been instrumental in documenting my physical progress, providing detailed records of my rehabilitation that proved my capacity for independent living. His notes showed steady improvement in cognitive function, motor skills, and emotional stability. The most important thing Jake documented was your consistent story about what really happened. Victoria noted, from the moment you regained consciousness, your account of events never changed, never wavered, and included specific details that someone with a traumatic brain injury would typically not remember so clearly. On Thursday evening, Victoria arrived with news that would change everything. We received a response from Madison's attorney this afternoon, she said, pulling out a folder. She's hired Robert Blackwood, one of the most expensive defense lawyers in the city. Is that bad news for us? Actually, it's perfect. Blackwood only takes cases he thinks he can win, and his fees are astronomical. The fact that Madison can afford him proves she has access to significant funds, which supports our theft charges. But where would she get that kind of money? Victoria's smile was predatory. From your accounts, of course. She's literally using your stolen money to pay for her defense against stealing your money. Blackwood is required to document his payment sources for ethical reasons, so he's inadvertently providing us with proof of additional financial crimes. The evening before the hearing, Sarah stopped by my room with a final surprise. Walter, the security guard, had continued his informal investigation and discovered something that even our legal team had missed. Walter reviewed the emergency call records from the night of your accident, Sarah explained. Madison called 911 from her cell phone at 10:47 p.m. But here's the interesting part. The call lasted less than 30 seconds, and she hung up before the dispatcher could ask follow-up questions. What does that mean? It means she provided the minimum information required to get medical help, but didn't want to answer detailed questions about what happened. Most people calling about a family emergency stay on the line longer and provide more complete information. Also, Sarah continued, Walter discovered that Madison made 2 other phone calls before calling for the ambulance. One was to Derek, your ex-boyfriend, and the other was to a number that traces back to Robert Blackwood's law office. The implications were staggering. Madison had called a lawyer before calling for medical help for her supposedly injured sister. She was setting up her legal defense before she even knew if I would survive, I realized. It gets worse. The call to Derek lasted almost 5 minutes, which suggests she was coordinating their story about what happened. Victoria arrived early Friday morning to help me prepare for the court appearance. She'd arranged for a wheelchair and professional clothing that would present me as competent and dignified rather than victimized. Remember, this is just the preliminary hearing, she advised as we made our way to the courthouse. The judge is going to hear basic arguments and decide whether to grant temporary restraining orders and asset freezes. The real trial will come later. Will Madison be there? She has to be. Her attorney has assured the court that she'll appear to respond to the allegations. As we entered the courthouse, I felt a mixture of terror and anticipation. For weeks, I had been powerless while Madison systematically destroyed my life. Today, I would finally have the chance to fight back. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh institutional appearance. Victoria wheeled me to the plaintiff's table where our legal team was already arranged, with boxes of evidence and thick folders of documentation. Madison arrived with her attorney at exactly 9 a.m., and seeing her again after everything felt like being punched in the stomach. She was wearing a conservative navy blue dress and had styled her hair to look more mature and responsible. Robert Blackwood was an intimidating man in his 50s, with silver hair and an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But what shocked me most was seeing my parents enter the courtroom behind Madison. Harold and Linda took seats in the gallery, as if they were there to support her rather than their other daughter, who'd been nearly murdered. Judge Margaret Foster called the session to order, and Victoria rose to present our case. For the next hour, she methodically laid out the evidence of Madison's crimes, the forged documents, the financial theft, the identity impersonation, and the attempted murder. Your Honor, the evidence shows a systematic campaign to steal the plaintiff's identity and assets beginning months before the physical assault that nearly killed her, Victoria stated. The defendant used the victim's incapacitation to accelerate her theft-forged legal documents to gain control of substantial assets and has been impersonating the victim in both personal and professional contexts. Madison's attorney, Robert Blackwood, presented a dramatically different narrative. Your Honor, my client is a devoted sister who stepped in to help manage her siblings' affairs during a medical crisis, he argued. Ms. Fiona Miller had been struggling with alcohol addiction and erratic behavior for months before her accident. Madison Miller has been trying to protect her sister's interests while she receives necessary treatment. The power of attorney documents were signed voluntarily. Blackwood continued, and all financial transactions were made with proper legal authority to preserve and protect assets that were being mismanaged. Judge Foster reviewed the evidence carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her understanding of the case's complexity. Mr. Blackwood, how do you explain the electronic signatures dated after your client's sister was hospitalized and sedated? Clerical error, Your Honor. The documents were signed before the accident, but the digital processing occurred later due to administrative delays. And the voice analysis showing your client impersonated her sister during work meetings. Ms. Madison Miller was helping to maintain her sister's employment by explaining her medical situation to concerned colleagues. Any apparent impersonation was actually translation and advocacy. But Judge Foster wasn't buying the defense explanations. After reviewing the medical records, financial evidence, and security footage, her decision was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to believe that serious crimes have been committed, she announced. I'm issuing an immediate restraining order preventing Madison Miller from accessing any assets or accounts belonging to Fiona Miller, and I'm freezing all financial transactions pending full investigation. Furthermore, I'm ordering the immediate return of all personal property, including residence access and personal belongings, to Fiona Miller. Madison's face went white and she grabbed Blackwood's arm urgently. My parents looked stunned, as if they couldn't process that their golden child was being revealed as a criminal. But Judge Foster wasn't finished. Given the severity of the allegations and the evidence of ongoing fraud, I'm also ordering that Madison Miller surrender her passport and remain within the county pending criminal charges. As the gavel fell, I felt the first taste of justice I had experienced in months. Madison turned to look at me for the first time since entering the courtroom, and the hatred in her eyes was pure and undiluted. "This isn't over," she mouthed silently. Victoria leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Yes, it is." The criminal trial began 3 weeks later in a packed courtroom. Word had spread through our community about the case, and local media had picked up the story as an example of family betrayal and financial elder abuse. I was no longer the helpless victim lying in a hospital bed. I was a survivor ready to reclaim my life. District Attorney Patricia Williams had taken personal interest in the case after reviewing Victoria's evidence. She stood before the jury with the confidence of someone who had an airtight case. Ladies and gentlemen, what you will hear over the next few days is a story of calculated betrayal, systematic theft, and attempted murder. She began. The defendant didn't just steal money from her sister. She tried to steal her entire existence. Madison sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered, her previous confidence replaced by barely contained panic. Robert Blackwood had clearly explained the gravity of her situation, because gone was the smug superiority she had displayed during her hospital visits. My parents sat in the gallery behind Madison's table, but their solidarity looked forced and uncomfortable. Harold kept checking his phone as if he had somewhere more important to be, while Linda stared at the floor and refused to make eye contact with anyone. The prosecution will prove that Madison Miller began planning this crime months in advance, DA Williams continued. She researched her sister's financial accounts, studied the legal requirements for medical proxy authority, and even investigated how long someone could remain on life support before organ donation procedures. A murmur went through the courtroom at this revelation. Several jury members looked visibly shocked. This was not a crime of passion or a family dispute that got out of hand. This was premeditated attempted murder, followed by systematic identity theft. Victoria had prepared me for the emotional difficulty of testifying, but nothing could have readied me for the experience of facing Madison across a courtroom while describing how she had tried to kill me. Please tell the court what happened on the evening of October 15th, DA Williams prompted. I took a deep breath and began my testimony, walking through every detail of that night, my excitement about the contract rushing home to share the news, and Madison's violent reaction when she realized I had achieved something she never could. She was waiting at the top of the stairs when I reached the landing. I testified. Her face was twisted with rage, and she screamed, "You think you're better than us now," before shoving me backward with both hands. What is your next memory? Waking up in intensive care 3 days later with my parents telling me that I deserved what happened because I was drunk and had attacked Madison. Robert Blackwood's cross-examination was brutal but predictable. He attempted to paint me as an unreliable narrator whose memories were compromised by brain trauma and whose testimony was motivated by sibling rivalry. "Ms. Miller, isn't it true that you had consumed alcohol earlier that evening?" "I had 1 glass of wine with dinner several hours before the incident." "And isn't it true that you have a history of competing with your sister for your parents' attention and approval?" "Madison and I have always had different personalities, but I never competed for attention through criminal behavior." "You claim your sister pushed you, but you suffered a traumatic brain injury. How can you be certain your memories are accurate?" "Because every medical professional who examined me confirmed that my injury pattern was consistent with being pushed, not with falling due to intoxication." The prosecution's case built momentum over 3 days of testimony. Dr. Martinez explained the medical evidence that proved assault rather than accidental fall. Thomas Wright walked the jury through the financial crimes with charts and documents that made Madison's theft impossible to deny. The voice analysis expert Dr. Rebecca Harrison played recordings that clearly demonstrated Madison had impersonated me during work meetings, her nervous laughter and incorrect terminology, providing stark contrast to my actual speech patterns. But the most damaging testimony came from Walter, the hospital security guard, who had continued investigating the case on his own time. "I've worked security for 15 years. Walter testified, "and I've never seen a family member respond to a trauma victim the way Madison Miller did." "Can you elaborate?" "Most people are frantic, crying, asking desperate questions about their loved one's condition. Madison was calm, composed, and she asked very specific questions about brain damage and the likelihood of permanent disability before she even saw her sister." "What kind of specific questions?" "She wanted to know if there was brain damage, whether the patient would be able to make decisions for herself, and how long someone could survive on life support. Those aren't normal questions from a worried family member." Walter also testified about Madison's phone records revealing that she had called Derek and a lawyer before calling for medical assistance. "The emergency call lasted 28 seconds, Walter explained. "She provided minimal information and hung up quickly as if she didn't want to answer follow-up questions about what happened." Derek himself proved to be a devastating witness for the prosecution. His loyalty to Madison had crumbled under the weight of evidence and the realization that he had been used as a pawn in her scheme. "Madison contacted me the night of the accident and told me that Fiona had been drinking heavily and had become violent," he testified. "She asked me to corroborate her story if anyone asked, saying that Fiona had a history of erratic behavior when she drank." "Did you believe this story?" "At the time, yes. Madison was very convincing and she seemed genuinely traumatized. But when I learned about all the financial crimes and the forged documents, I realized she had been lying about everything." "Did Madison ask you to participate in any other deceptions?" Derek's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "She wanted me to help her go through Fiona's apartment and remove anything that might contradict her story about Fiona having drinking problems. She brought empty bottles and staged them around the apartment to make it look like Fiona was hiding alcohol." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs, and Judge Foster had to call for order. On the 4th day of trial, Madison's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Robert Blackwood had advised her not to testify, but Madison insisted on taking the stand, in her own defense, convinced she could manipulate the jury just as she had manipulated our family for years. D.A. Williams approached Madison with surgical precision during cross-examination. "Ms. Miller, you testified that you were concerned about your sister's drinking. When did this concern first develop?" "She had been acting strangely for several months before the accident." "Strange in what way?" "Secretive, paranoid, making wild claims about having important job opportunities." "You mean the $6 million contract she had actually signed?" Madison faltered for the first time. "I didn't know about any contract." "But bank records show you had been monitoring her financial accounts for months before the accident. How could you miss a $6 million deposit?" I wasn't monitoring her accounts for personal gain. I was worried about her financial decisions. DA Williams produced a stack of documents. These are your internet search records, Ms. Miller. Can you explain why you were researching how to declare someone mentally incompetent and medical proxy legal requirements 3 weeks before your sister's accident? Madison's composure completely shattered. I was trying to understand how to help her. And why were you researching organ donation procedures, and how long can someone survive on life support? That's not what those searches were about. What were they about, Ms. Miller? Madison looked desperately toward her attorney, but Blackwood could only shake his head. She had insisted on testifying against his advice, and now she was destroying her own defense. I was scared she was going to hurt herself, Madison said weakly. So scared that you called a lawyer before calling for medical help when she was lying unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do, Ms. Miller. You had been planning it for months. The final blow came when DA Williams played the audio recording that Jake had secretly made during one of Madison's hospital visits, the one where she had explicitly stated her intention to erase me and take over my life. Because you always thought you were better than everyone else. Madison's voice echoed through the courtroom. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect everything while I struggled to find my place. Well, now I have everything you had, and it fits me much better. My parents looked devastated as they heard their daughter's true nature revealed in her own words. Linda started crying silently while Harold stared at Madison with growing horror. When the prosecution rested its case, Robert Blackwood presented a half-hearted defense that focused on Madison's emotional problems and claimed she had acted out of misguided love rather than malicious intent. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Madison collapsed into her chair as if the words had physically struck her. On the charges of aggravated identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charges of wire fraud and financial elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Judge Foster scheduled sentencing for the following week, but she addressed Madison immediately after the verdict was read. Ms. Miller, I have presided over many criminal cases in my career, but I have rarely seen such calculated cruelty directed toward a family member. You didn't just attempt to steal your sister's money. You tried to steal her entire identity while she was fighting for her life. Madison was led away in handcuffs, finally facing the consequences of her actions. My parents sat in stunned silence, apparently unable to process that their golden child was actually a criminal who had nearly murdered their other daughter. As I watched Madison disappear through the courthouse doors, I felt a mixture of justice and sadness. She'd brought this on herself through her choices, but the destruction of our family was still devastating to witness. Victoria Stone squeezed my shoulder gently. It's over, Fiona. You won. But even in victory, I knew that the hardest part was still ahead, rebuilding my life and learning to trust again after such profound betrayal. 1 week later, Judge Foster delivered Madison's sentence in a courtroom that was more crowded than before. Local media had been covering the case extensively, and it had become a symbol of family dysfunction and financial abuse that resonated with many people. Madison Miller. Judge Foster began her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Your crimes represent a level of calculated cruelty that shocks the conscience of this court. You attempted to murder your sister, systematically stole her identity and assets, and showed no remorse even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of your guilt. Madison stood beside Robert Blackwood, her face pale and drawn. The confident woman who had mocked me in my hospital bed was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the magnitude of her actions. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 10 years. On the combined charges of identity theft, wire fraud, and financial elder abuse, I sentence you to an additional 8 years to run consecutively with the attempted murder sentence. Your total sentence is 23 years in state prison. Madison's knees buckled, and she had to grab the defense table for support. 23 years meant she would be nearly 50 when she was released, assuming she served her full sentence. But Judge Foster wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm ordering complete financial restitution to the victim, including all stolen funds interest and punitive damages totaling $1.2 million. All assets currently under your control are to be immediately transferred back to Fiona Miller. Furthermore, upon your release, you will be subject to 10 years of supervised probation with no contact orders preventing any communication with your sister or interference in her life. My parents had been charged as accessories after the fact for their role in covering up Madison's crimes and abandoning me during my recovery. Harold received 2 years of probation and community service, while Linda was sentenced to 6 months in county jail for her more active participation in the deception campaign. Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Judge Foster addressed my parents. Your failure to protect one daughter while enabling the other's criminal behavior represents a profound abdication of parental responsibility. The court hopes you will use your sentences to reflect on the choices that led to this tragedy. The extended family members who had participated in Madison's mockery campaign faced various consequences. Uncle Robert was fined $50,000 and received probation for his role in the financial conspiracy. Cousin Ashley and grandmother Patricia received smaller fines and community service for their participation in the psychological abuse campaign. 3 months after the sentencing, I was finally able to return to my apartment. Technova Solutions had not only held my position, but had enhanced my contract with additional security provisions and a substantial raise after learning what I had endured. Jake had been instrumental in my physical and emotional recovery, and our relationship had evolved from therapist and patient to something much deeper. He understood trauma in ways that most people couldn't, and his steady presence had helped me rebuild my confidence and sense of safety. "How does it feel to be home?" he asked as we stood in my living room, which had been completely restored after Madison's occupation. "Different," I admitted. "The space feels the same, but I'm not the same person who lived here before." "You're stronger now," Jake said, taking my hand. "What Madison meant to destroy, she accidentally forged into something unbreakable." Victoria Stone had helped me establish the Survivor Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of family abuse and financial elder exploitation. The foundation provided legal assistance, emergency housing, and emotional support for people who had been betrayed by relatives they trusted. "Your case has opened doors for other victims," Victoria explained during one of our foundation planning meetings. "People who thought they had no recourse against family members are coming forward and finding the courage to seek justice." Sarah, the nurse who had first believed my story and documented everything, had become the foundation's first board member. Her experience in healthcare made her invaluable in identifying and helping other vulnerable patients who might be experiencing family abuse. "The most important thing we can do is educate healthcare workers about the warning signs," Sarah said. "Too many professionals assume that family members have good intentions when sometimes they're the greatest threat to a patient's welfare." 6 months after Madison's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Derek, my ex-boyfriend, who had been manipulated into participating in Madison's scheme, requested a meeting to apologize for his role in my suffering. "I know there's nothing I can say that will undo what happened," he said, sitting across from my desk, looking genuinely remorseful. "But I needed you to know that I was completely fooled by Madison, and I'm ashamed of how easily I was manipulated." Derek Madison is very good at manipulation. She convinced our entire family that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. I don't hold you responsible for believing her lies. I should have questioned her story more thoroughly. I should have tried to see you myself instead of just accepting her version of events. You're right, you should have. But Madison exploited your trust and used your feelings for her to make you complicit in her crimes. That doesn't make you a criminal, it makes you another victim. Derek's testimony during the trial had been crucial in exposing Madison's premeditation and the scope of her deception. His cooperation with prosecutors had helped ensure that she received the maximum sentence possible. 1 year after the trial, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I visited Madison in prison, not for reconciliation or forgiveness, but for closure, and to show her that I had not just survived, but flourished despite her attempts to destroy me. The visiting room at the Women's Correctional Facility was harsh and institutional, with concrete walls and fluorescent lighting that drained color from everything. Madison appeared in orange prison clothing, her hair grown out and her face bearing the stress of incarceration. "I didn't think you would come," she said quietly, taking the seat across from me at the small metal table. "I came to tell you that your plan failed completely," I said calmly. "You tried to erase me and take my place, but instead you gave me the opportunity to discover who I really am when everything is stripped away." Madison looked genuinely confused. "I don't understand. You thought my worth came from my job, my apartment, my bank account. But when you took all of that away, I learned that my real strength comes from something you can never touch: my integrity, my resilience, and my ability to build genuine relationships with people who care about me. Fiona, I'm sorry for what I did. I was jealous and angry, and I made terrible choices." "I know you're sorry, Madison, but sorry doesn't undo the trauma or rebuild the trust you destroyed. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered the question carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't about absolving you of responsibility for your actions. It's about freeing myself from the burden of carrying hatred. So yes, I forgive you for my own peace of mind, but that doesn't mean I'll ever trust you or allow you back into my life. What's going to happen when I get out? That's entirely up to you. You'll be almost 50 years old with a serious criminal record. You can either use that time to genuinely change who you are, or you can continue being the person who thought attempted murder was an acceptable response to sibling rivalry. As I prepared to leave, Madison asked one final question. "Are you happy now?" I smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, the smile was completely genuine. "Yes, Madison. I'm happier than I've ever been because I'm surrounded by people who actually care about me instead of people who see me as competition or a resource to exploit." Walking out of that prison, I felt the final weight of Madison's betrayal lift from my shoulders. She had tried to steal my life, but instead she had forced me to build a better one. 2 years after the trial, Jake and I were married in a small ceremony attended by our chosen family, Sarah Victoria, Dr. Martinez Walter, and the close friends who had supported me through my recovery. My biological family was notably absent, but their absence felt like freedom rather than loss. The Survivor Foundation had grown to serve hundreds of clients across 3 states, providing legal assistance and emotional support to victims of family financial abuse. We had successfully prosecuted dozens of cases similar to mine and had helped change legislation to provide better protection for vulnerable adults. Looking back, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Madison hadn't pushed you down those stairs? Jake asked me one evening as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset. "Actually, I think about that sometimes," I replied. "If she hadn't attacked me, I probably would have continued thinking our family was just dysfunctional, rather than recognizing how toxic and dangerous they really were." "So in a strange way, she did you a favor. She revealed everyone's true nature. Madison showed me she was capable of attempted murder. My parents showed me they would abandon their daughter rather than face uncomfortable truths. And the extended family showed me they were willing to participate in psychological abuse without question." "But it also showed you who your real allies were," Jake pointed out. "Exactly. Sarah Victoria, Dr. Martinez Walter, and ultimately you. People who saw injustice and chose to fight against it instead of participating in it or ignoring it." As the sun set over the city, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from my trauma. Family isn't defined by blood relationships or shared genetics. True family consists of people who stand by you during your darkest moments, who fight for your welfare when you can't fight for yourself, and who celebrate your victories without jealousy or resentment. Madison had tried to destroy me because she couldn't bear to see me succeed, but her attack had ultimately connected me with people who wanted to see me not just survive, but thrive. The foundation we built together was helping hundreds of other survivors find their own paths to justice and healing. "I have something to tell you," Jake said, pulling out a small envelope. "The foundation received a major grant today. We're going to be able to expand our services to 5 more states and hire additional attorneys." "That's incredible news," I exclaimed, opening the envelope to see the grant details. "There's more. The grant specifically mentioned your case as inspiration for their funding decision. They said your story proves that survivors can not only rebuild their lives, but can also create positive change that helps other victims." That night, as I lay in bed beside the man who had helped me rebuild my life, I thought about all the people who would be helped by the foundation's expansion. Madison's attempt to destroy me had become the catalyst for helping countless other survivors find justice and healing. The ultimate irony was that Madison, who had always resented my success, had inadvertently become the reason for my greatest achievement, creating an organization that would outlast both of us and continue helping victims of family abuse for generations to come. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you ever do. Madison tried to steal my life, but instead, she gave me a purpose that was far more meaningful than anything I could have imagined before her betrayal. Justice wasn't just about Madison's prison sentence or the financial restitution. True justice was building a life so fulfilling and meaningful that her attempts to harm me ultimately became the source of my greatest strength and contribution to the world. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely, and how did you find the strength to rebuild your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own family crisis? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding justice, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that survival is possible even after the deepest betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when they show you who they really are.